I just want to be clear in terms of the definition of people dying of COVID. So the case definition is very simplistic. It means at the time of death, it was a COVID positive diagnosis. So that means that if you were in hospice and had already been given, a few weeks to live, and then you also were found to have COVID, that would be counted as a COVID death. It means that technically, even if you died of a clear alternate cause, but you had COVID at the same time, it's still listed as a COVID death. So everyone who's listed as a COVID death doesn't mean that was the cause of the death, but they had COVID at the time of death. I hope that's helpful.
Can you talk about your concerns about deaths being misreported by coronavirus because of either lack of testing or standards for how they're characterized?
So I think in this country, we've taken a very liberal approach to mortality. And I think the reporting here has been pretty straightforward over the last 5 to 6 weeks. Prior to that, when there wasn't testing in January and February, that's a very different situation and unknown. There are other countries that if you had a pre-existing condition, and let's say the virus caused you to go to the ICU and then have a heart or kidney problem. Some countries are recording that as a heart issue or a kidney issue and not a COVID-19 death. Right now, we're still recording it, and the great thing about having forms that come in and a form that has the ability to mark it as COVID-19 infection, the intent is right now that if someone dies with COVID-19, we are counting that as a COVID-19 death.
Can you be sure? You hear from coroners that that's not necessarily the case. Or are you sure? How can you be confident about that? And is there any concern that it skews the data that you're trying to collect in terms of projections? And
It's been a while since we've seen Dr. Birx, though, for example. She is the coordinator of the coronavirus task force. When might we see her and be able to get an update from her and be able to ask questions of her?
Yeah, again, I don't know when in this capacity you will see her, but I talk to Dr. Birx regularly. In fact, I talked to her just before I came out here because I had some questions about some funny numbers I heard from Senator Elizabeth Warren, and she helped me to correct those numbers, which I'd like to correct here because I think it's unfair to the American people to give inflated case numbers and mortality numbers because it leads to those same Americans making the decision to not get a mammogram, to not have the cancer screenings they need. So I'd like to just reveal to you some information Dr. Birx just shared with me. Elizabeth Warren erroneously said there were 25,000 new cases today. In fact, there were less than 20,000. Senator Warren said there were 2,000 deaths. In fact, there have been less than 1,000. I spoke with Dr. Birx about that. So I'd encourage our Democratic colleagues and all Americans to make sure we're putting out their good information because it does have consequences.
Thank you very much. I think this question is probably for Minister Elliott, actually. I know you've taken questions before about how we include positive COVID-19 cases and deaths, but with regards to the one that we unfortunately just read about, the young girl, the word from Toronto Public Health is that she died of health complications unrelated to COVID-19, but did test positive. So I'm just curious if you want to reiterate why that is being categorized. If it's unrelated to the COVID-19 positive, why it's being listed anyway?
Well, first of all, any death as a result of COVID or where COVID is situated is a tragedy, as it certainly was in this case. Like to extend my condolences to the family of this young person. It's a terrible thing to lose a child, but in some cases, I'm not saying specifically with respect to this case, but in some cases there are situations where there are other pre-existing conditions that may actually be the cause of the loss rather than COVID. COVID is there, but may not have been the cause of death. But
well, Charles, they really haven't given us much of an explanation at this point. The way we found out is I was asking the county health officer about 2 coronavirus deaths involving people in their 20s and whether they had any underlying conditions. Then one of his answers surprised us.
The first one didn't have any. He died in a motorcycle accident.
New questions tonight about the accuracy of the state's coronavirus death numbers. Orange County Health Officer Dr. Raul Pino telling us one person reported to have died from COVID was killed in a motorcycle accident. So was it removed from the data?
I don't think so. I have to double check. We were arguing. We were discussing and trying to argue with the state, not because of the numbers. I mean, it's 100. It's not make any difference if it's 99. Yeah. But the validity that the fact that the individual didn't die from COVID-19, died in a crash. But you can actually argue that it could have been the COVID-19 that caused him to crash. So I don't know the conclusion of that one.
We looked into it, and there are still 2 people in their 20s on Orange County's data list for COVID deaths. So is this a contradiction to how the state says it's counting deaths? The Florida Department of Health sending Fox 35 a statement saying a COVID death is determined if COVID-19 is listed as the immediate or underlying cause of death or listed as one of the significant conditions contributing to death, or if there's a confirmed COVID-19 infection from a lab test and the cause of death doesn't meet exclusion criteria like trauma, suicide, homicide, overdose, motor vehicle accident, etc.
The only thing that I could say to people is that the data that I'm providing you with is the data that we consume from the state, and we are offering you to the best data that we have.
And Dr. Pino tells us that the medical examiner's office has to sign off on all COVID-19 deaths. We also reached out to that office and have not heard back.
So that's just the language for the definition, and this next slide, the new probable case definition. So
can I just ask a quick question? So back on the previous page, the new probable case definition with FDA-approved positive lab with or without symptoms. Do you also have to have the positive lab along with close contact, or is the close contact with confirmed or probable cases a separate identifying thing?
So I'll explain this further.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah,
okay.
No. It's just an overview, gets kind of confusing. So this is a different options that we have for probable case definition. So if you do the FDA-approved testing, which right now is serology, looking for antibodies, IgG, IgM, you have to have the clinical criteria. And if you don't have that, and then you have the EpiLink, then you could still be counted as a case. So if we look at the yellow box here, that's the approved testing, right? If yellow, you have the test, and then you have any of the blue, you're a probable case. If you're yellow and you have any other close contact, which doesn't mean you're sick, you're a probable case. And then if you don't do any of that lab work, and then you get sick and you were a contact of a case, you are then counted as a probable case. So the clinical criteria that they have defined is at least 2 symptoms of fever, subjective or measured, chills, rigors, myalgia, headache, sore throat, new smell and taste disorders, 2 of those, or 1 of cough, shortness of breath, difficulty breathing, or evidence of pneumonia without an alternative diagnosis and severe respiratory distress. So there's many ors and then there's many ands. So in order to be counted as, to see if you meet the EpiLink definition, you have to be a close contact of someone who's a confirmed case of COVID-19 or a probable case, or you came to a location where it's endemic. Right now, Texas has stated that they are considering the state as an endemic area. So that means if I just went and got serology testing done with no symptoms and I was positive, whether it's saying that recent infection or current infection, my new antibodies, or it's like I've had them for a while, I would be counted as a probable case. So basically, these 3 boxes, you can be yellow and blue without green to be counted as probable, yellow and green without the blue, and then blue and green without the yellow. But for the blue and green, if you had contact, that has to be within 14 days. So let's say activity dies down, slows down, and we're not considered endemic. Then we need that 14-day. But right now, that 14-day doesn't matter. Moving forward, it may, when activity slows down. So at the end of this definition, there are 15 different options on how you could be classified as a probable case.
Before we go into from the 15, you're talking about the expansions?
Yeah.
Is that what you're about to go into, the probable expansions? Or are you
So-
talking about the variables here?
These variables, there's
Okay.
15 ways to.
Yeah, let's go into that then, and then we'll ask questions.
Okay, so that same scenario, a little bit more extended. Now, if we look at it with the new probable case definition, where some individuals had the FDA-approved testing of IgM, IgG, some individuals just had contact with someone who is classified as a COVID case, whether they are confirmed or probable. So at the end of this, based on this diagram and what they report, there's a total of 17 cases now. One is still only confirmed because that was that original index case who then had all these contacts underneath in orange. And all the rest of them became probable, but they are still considered a case. So.
Very good, thank you for that.
Yeah.
The death consideration is important as well. They've changed the definition there, or the requirements for a death from COVID. Do you have that slide with you today?
Yeah.
You want to jump to that one and walk us through that?
Okay, so based on this new definition for deaths related to COVID, so this white section here, the cause of death, is typically what we'll look at when, receiving anything from the ME's office to see how to classify that, if it will be related to a disease. So if they, report respiratory symptoms, never had a chance to do testing, if there was no testing done, you are not counted as a COVID-19 related death, whether you had close contact, whether you were in an endemic area. But now if they think that it's possibly related and they just list it as a cause, that will be counted. So no diagnostic testing is needed to be counted as a death related to COVID.
If the attending physician puts down COVID as the cause of death or a possible contributing factor of death, then then that patient will be considered a COVID-related death.
Without a test.
That's right, with no antigen test, with no serological test, no blood, with no PCR test.
And it doesn't matter how they arrange these cause of deaths. Like in this example, it's listed at the third level. So it doesn't have to be first, second, third. They had so many underlying conditions. If it's listed, then they will count it.